name is Dave Maier, and welcome to Citizen Bear, a new podcast. I'm the author of the Demonstrative Citizen, The Revelation of Two Dragons. While I would love all of you to buy this book and read it and take it in and think about the themes for yourself, it's not really the purpose of being here today. I want this podcast to really talk about many of the tenets that we put out in the book, many of the ideas, many of the heartaches that go on in the book. It is a story about people struggling through things and finding themselves, learning to walk the journey of citizenship and faith again, and finding out fundamentals that are important to their existence, banding together, and most importantly, learning to take care of each other. Regardless of your political ideological stance, it is hard to deny that our society and the world are struggling with many competing pressures. If history has taught us one thing, it is that such times rarely bring easy solutions and peaceful change. We must never forget that such times our choices matter. The principal character in the book is a man who has become known as Bear. Through a series of unconscionable circumstances, Bear is a citizen who is forced from his comfortable and somewhat mundane life to begin a journey fraught with danger and heartache. Here he learns that free society inherently must walk a combined journey of faith and citizenship, demonstrative citizenship. Through his combined journey, he and many like him learn to care for each other and those around them, ultimately finding the truth that lies within each of them. In keeping, it is equally important for each of us to consider many of the choices that have been laid at our feet, not through the ideological lens of career politicians or their talking heads in the media or even social media. I don't ask anyone to embrace a particular opinion, but rather listen to and consider a down-to-earth view. We may all find more common ground in a fresh and human perspective on what is being used to divide us. We must clearly understand where these pressures come from and what motivates their use. Even if we disagree on particular points, it is imperative that we respect and care for each other. For those who are unable to listen, work through issues, who shout at the rain because they have been taught to hate the rain, are a problem, the antithesis of free society. You are a pawn. If you are one of these, you have become a pawn of the great deceiver who has been with us since the dawn of time. And that is a sad situation for any person. Before moving on, I want to emphasize that this is not a post-apocalyptic conversation, nor is it the advice of billionaires or special forces operators. While we can learn a great deal from such noble people, we must also consider what has been laid at our feet from the perspective of the common person, thereby placing our choices into real context that each of us can act on, empowering all of us to boldly walk our combined journey of faith and citizenship. Furthermore, this podcast will be a conversation, sometimes with segments recorded outside or on other locations. There are a wide range of topics to consider as we look forward. However, for this first podcast, I want to generally take a 10,000-foot view and just talk about some of the ideas that we're going to have and really just cover some of the bases. Moving on to the first segment. In my book, The Demonstrative Citizen, The Revelation of Two Dragons, I talk at length about the combined journey of faith and citizenship. Faith has always been an inherent part of our social fabric, even if you don't practice any particular religion. Our laws and social fabric are founded in the morality of the Christian faith, whether we like it or not. As a Christian myself, I do believe that there can be many paths to such enlightenment. Still, I also believe that they all must eventually arrive at Jesus Christ, for he is the only one who brings us grace and redemption, which is something to think about in your own personal journey. But by no means would we ever put down or belittle or disregard any path or faith that you may have, because many of these tenets in morality are universal. Nonetheless, regardless of where you are in your spiritual journey, we must never lose sight of how important faith-based morality is in our journey of citizenship and free society. This is the reason our founders enshrined the freedom of religion in the First Amendment of our Constitution. It is also the reason why religion, particularly Christianity, is under assault around the world by those who seek a more authoritarian society. With all this in mind, the journey of faith and citizenship is not what democracy and the republic is founded on. More accurately, the journey of faith and citizenship is the practice, the application of our choices in free society. This is what my friend Bear lives in his struggle. He rises to the challenges before him by putting his choices into actions. What I would propose to you is that democracy within the republic is solely about the nobility of the common man, the common person, those people who, regardless of their station, selflessly rise to the great deeds. I would also propose to you that true nobility is founded in love, not a title or a social status. These are the doers of deeds, those who devote themselves to the great actions. They are what Theodore Roosevelt called the man in the arena. This ideal is what those who seek a more authoritarian form of society wish to deny you. Remember, it cannot be denied. It can only be repressed mildly, for such nobility lies in the heart and in the bone of all people, if we choose to exercise it, and our faith reminds us of this every day. Segment 2. Let us get off the deep and heavy stuff and talk something a little more tangible, if you choose to make it fun, topic. That is of emergency preparedness. I think Bear was a person who found himself trying very hard to be prepared in life, as many of us do. And when true crisis, unconscionable events, war comes to his country, he finds out how prepared he is and how woefully prepared he isn't. For this segment, I really want us to take a look at preparedness from a very common guy point of view, a very practical point of view. This is not the kind of preparedness that's going to keep you, you're not going to be part of a Navy SEAL team down the road here and, learn all kinds of great stuff and, carry machine guns. This is really down to earth stuff that we can do, and each person should do their best to prepare. The world we live in today almost mandated, and it doesn't have to be a war setting. It is strictly a setting that relates more to things like hurricanes and disasters, and certainly conflict and dystopian society can certainly contribute to that too. But we need to be prepared as individuals because that helps us, that helps our society be stronger. Being prepared helps us to be ready for those moments in time where government may not be able to rise to the challenge. And we've seen this increasingly in our society, in our country, where North Carolina is a great example, but there are many, many others. Government's reaction is often ideologically based, which is shocking. And then there is also the fact that there is just not enough resources to really solve the problem. We've seen a lot of great organizations rise on this and really contribute and do great work to augment FEMA and other organizations, often carrying a lion's share of the load. But we as individuals can contribute to that. We can help care for each other, and we can take care of ourselves. And the more of that we can do, the better our situation will be for everyone around us. I think that there's several big areas to cover in this. The principal areas that most people preach on emergency preparedness are air, water, food, fire warmth, shelter, and security. To those topics, I would also add, based on recent events, hygiene and probably the ability to care for one another, building friends, building a circle of people around you who are also like-minded, and you can work together if trouble should come to your door. I look forward to doing this episode because I think it's very important that when we get out there, I know a lot of great people who can contribute to this, people who work very hard, and they cover everything from being able to tell you what to eat in the woods to just fundamentals about the economics of it. And we can really talk about a lot of these different topics and get out there, and we can do some practical things out in there. If you're a guy who's, got 3 gun saves, 50,000 rounds of ammunition, and enough food to last, the next 10 years, you're probably not going to get a lot out of that. I want to reach out to those people who are on the fence. I want to reach out to that great person who's just trying his best and hasn't really prepared. And it's a little shocking in our society that in certain areas where, frankly, there are earthquakes and hurricanes and other things, it's a shocking percentage are not prepared and have make no effort to be prepared in an emergency situation. And I think we need to reach out to those people and say, this is important and you can take these steps and make it affordable and make it practical and things that you can work on over years. Certainly one of the areas of that is security. I know there are people who don't like firearms, and if you don't, that's your privilege. There are other steps you can take to work on security. But there is also no denying the fact that a firearm is your principal form of security if you need it. And the Second Amendment topics are something that I definitely want to talk about, and I want to talk about some practical application on that. I've handled firearms for, God, I hate to admit, over 50 years, and I've carried a firearm, when I choose to, for probably well over about 40 of those years. So I have a lot of experience, I've gotten a lot of training, I've done a lot of the things that you need to do to be more proficient, and I have a lot of friends in this area and people who want to do the same and be proficient and down to earth, and I think we can pass along a fair amount of knowledge. That includes also some of the resources that are out in the world and in the community where you can find good things to utilize. Certainly there's insurances. I mean, an organization, I belong to a couple of them now. I'll talk about those later, but if you want to be part of that, I highly recommend it because it has become a controversial topic and you probably will have to deal with a lot of you're forced to use a firearm, even in an emergency situation. So you probably should have some type of backup like that, and I think it's well worth the money. Certainly one of the things that we learned about in dealing with this when we had COVID was an eye-opener, and COVID showed a lot of things. I know a lot of people would talk about air. Well, why do I need air stuff? Well, we wore masks, right? We were mandated to wear masks. I went into, when that started, masks were hard to find. People were buying them up off the shelves. Fortunately, I had a bin full of this stuff. I pulled it off the shelf, and I told my wife, we're in business, no problem, you know what I mean? And we started building from there. Later, I was trying to find what I could in the grocery store, and there was a lady came walking down the aisle with me, and she had a full respirator mask on with, NBC or CBRN filters on it. And I was like, at first I was like, well, that's a little overkill, but then I thought, I have that stuff. I can play that game. But we didn't need that, fortunately, but it's a good thing to have, and it's something to think about. So these things have happened in our time. We've watched food fly off the shelves. I was a little ahead of the curve, but I made one last run to the grocery store with my wife during COVID. The bunkers were empty. There was nothing left in the freezer or the fridge sections. Canned goods were virtually sold out. But most shockingly of all, there was no toilet paper. I don't know who these people are, but I got to tell you, if you're facing the end of the world or, dystopian circumstances, I'm not sure wiping my butt is the first thing that came to my mind, but okay, and survival. But it has value, and I do understand it. I have some things that I tell you for my own emergency preparedness. I use a product from a company called Clean Freak, and I highly recommend them. I have nothing to do with them as far as, being aligned with them. I'm just a customer. But these types of things are they have toilet wipes. They have hygiene, just personal, bathing wipes. They're excellent, and I would recommend them to anyone. And those are types of things you can put in your emergency kit to augment things like toilet paper and hygiene products, and they'll last a long time. And I got to tell you, I used them. I enjoy them. They're great for hunting, going out. During COVID, I had to cross the state of Pennsylvania several times because I had family elderly family who my wife and I had to take care of. And I have to tell you, for those who didn't do it, it was a shocking experience. They opened the bathrooms, but there was no toilet paper a lot of the time. And you had to, the rest stops, the tables were piled in the center of the floor, the weeds were growing up around them. It was apocalyptic, I have to tell you. There were truck drivers and maybe one or two people in cars. And it was bone-chilling going in there. Fortunately, I had products like that with me, and I learned to stock them, and I kept them in my pocket. So, I didn't get caught short. These are all circumstances and things you can talk about in emergency preparedness and, frankly, use them in your day-to-day life. I think that moving on with this, I don't want to bog down in the introduction with this stuff, but there's a lot of our emergency preparedness that we can talk about, and it probably will take up several segments, and I want to encourage people to really listen and think about it. And we can have a lot of fun with it because, frankly, it is fun, and it's a nice peace of mind. You put it in a box, you put it away. I keep it in a blank part of my cool blank part of my basement that's not finished, and there it sits until you need it, and it's a nice peace of mind for you and your family if you're doing things like that, or you need it, or you're driving across state for some reason. There may be real life things where you're camping or doing other things where some of these things can really be worthwhile too. Certainly, I can tell you other, practical things. Our world changed after 9/11. It did. I was alive through all of that. There are many people that may watch who weren't or were too young. The world desperately changed, particularly for emergency preparedness. I think a lot of us, and this also goes for the security aspects. I was a younger guy with a young family when 9/11 occurred, and I remember going and taking my son out of school and holding his hand and having to explain to him what was happening in general terms and, be strong for him. And frankly, back then, when that was happening, as a father, I really didn't know what was next. I didn't know what was coming at us after that. Was this a preliminary attack? I mean, what was it? Were there people amongst us who were going to attack us? I didn't know. I remember going back to my place, and I had a small place with my wife and son at the time. And, I used to shoot in my youth and do a lot of things, and I'd put all that away. I mean, I had like a small box of 22 rounds. I had I think I had a box of ammunition for my .357 Magnum. That was it. I mean, I really didn't have things in the house. I kept that stuff locked up, and I had no use for it. I was starting a career. So keeping a little more of that and learning how to store that and utilize it and learn how to practice and be safe with those things is a very, very important part of the emergency preparedness thing, because you don't really know what's coming at you. And having lived through it, I can tell you, it's not a fun thought when you're a father. It's easy to talk about the politics and the other things, but the truth of the matter is it comes down to you being there and being a parent and taking care of your family. That's really what it comes down to in emergency preparedness. Moving on, getting beyond a little emergency preparedness, and again, I have to say I'm looking forward to the several episodes we do with that, because I have some fun people down the road, and there's a lot of cool topics we can talk about in it. So it's something that's, low-hanging fruit, if you will. I want to move into another segment that, moving beyond that. Segment 3 talks about the enemy within and the enemy without. In the story, Bear faces this. He really deals with the fact that there are two fronts, and that there is this enemy state that's attacked this country, landed troops, and we are unprepared for it. And he forms up with people, and they work towards this. They try to make a stand, and they try to do their best to take care of each other as the government rebuilds and starts to regroup, which also gets into ideas of militia, which we can talk about later, but that's not really the point. The point is that in our world today, and I think, I take a statement that was made a long, long time ago by Vladimir Putin, of all people. Yes, that Vladimir Putin. And while I don't want to make Vladimir Putin a hero on anything, we should not forget that he is not a stupid man, and he is geopolitically very, very savvy, and he is plugged into things. So it would be foolish not to listen to some things he said. And a long time ago, he made an offhand comment about the fact that if we were all not careful in the world, we would end up in a situation where everyone was fighting everyone. And I'm a little afraid that we've come to that point, not just on the fact that there is change in our world where we talk about a new world order and we talk about some of the other states that are fighting against that. And frankly, there's a lot of breakdown within the Western civilization and the free society, which has moved shockingly towards a more authoritarian stance. And we can talk more on why that may be. We can talk about the ideas of the New World Order, but there's also, I think, a segment of fear in that, a loss of control. And there's this natural tendency to want to, tighten down. And I think in free society, that is a mistake. It is the wrong way to go for us. We have to redouble down on our values and our freedoms and our liberties and use those because they are our strength. But like I said, that is another topic. We have reached a point where so much has become segmented. We've become tribal. And we are looking in some places in some parts of the world where you're seeing, even here in America, what is really a neo-Marxist movement that is trying to disrupt our country and disrupt some of our ideas, and it hides behind political and ideological views that get people riled up. We should be very cautious of this. It's not that we can't entertain thought. It's that we should not, or talk about them. We should talk about it. But we should be careful about what the means are there and whether we are preserving our freedoms and our liberties. And that's the one thing that it seems they want to take away from us. And we should be very careful about that. Bear learns about this. He faces it head on. And he finds out just how determined they are to hold on and to support change, that they feel that in the conflict of war that they will have an upper hand. And so Bear is fighting on 2 or 3 fronts, both socially and, frankly, militarily. And he has to overcome this, and so do the people around him. And it's not a pleasant thing. And we find out that many of the people in our government are supporting some of these ideals because they support a new way forward in the world with a new order, something of a Marxist viewpoint, but it is a more authoritarian society when you get done with it. Might sound nice, but it's not democracy within the republic. So moving through this, it is an interesting topic that we have to continue to look into and talk about our free society and the manipulation of it. But I would say that the one thing that I feel is the greatest threat to our free society is the career politician. I think more and more people are awakening to this, awakening to the neo-Marxist movement going on in their society, waking up to the concerns or the downfalls of what we are calling the New World Order, and starting to ask questions. But there is one entity that we must address, and we are beginning to become aware of it, is the career politician. We have allowed this to creep up on us, and the tribalism that has come out in our country and the fragmentation of politics and ideological views has really been a segue for them to hold onto power. People will vote their politics. They will vote their party before they will vote to get these people out of office. I think we have to get to a point in this country where we have to start ending the reign of the career politician. I don't like term limits because we are a free society, and I think it limits on that. But I do think that a version of a magic number would be a good solution for Congress anyway, where your combination of age and years in office in that particular role in office would max out when those numbers combined reaches a certain number. Now, this may not stop some career politicians who start very young, but it would help to keep us from having senators and Congress people who are in their 90s sitting in like vegetables in wheelchairs, and we know they're not representing anybody, right? Somebody's voting for them. And we want to start avoiding that in our society. And we want people who are no longer taking care of special interests and people who are getting them elected and who are driven on their own personal greed and their own pursuit of power. We want those people out in a certain amount of time. We want to get back to representational government where the people we elect represent us. And that is something where the best solution to that is voters really realizing that ending the term of a career politician is more important than voting on a political party line. And that's true of Democrats, Republicans, Independents. You've been in office too long. You need to go find a different office seat. You need to move up to the Senate or find something else to do in government. But you just can't camp here and make your own way and build your own fortune on our backs. And I think that's something these people have led us to corruption and other things in our government that I'm not sure it's really working for us the way it's supposed to. That shouldn't end democracy within the republic. It should end the career politician. One last note in this general area. I want to talk about what democracy within the republic really is. And I know people throw that around, and a lot of people say, well, what is democracy within the republic? Define it for me. Well, in the book, we talk about the journey of faith and citizenship as we move along, and Baier's experience with his friends and his inner circle as they build their work. And I think that the journey of faith and citizenship is an important part of that, but it is not what democracy within the republic is about. It is the segue to accomplish. It is acting on those things that makes the journey of faith and citizenship important. It is being able to act on our beliefs, being able to act on our choices and bring them to resolution. I believe, and I would propose to you, that democracy within the republic is about the nobility of the common man. Those people who try hard, and I talked about this earlier, but again, I have to emphasize, and it's something that I think we will talk about more and more as we go down the road. The common man in society rises. These are the people who fight the wars. These are the people who build the ships, who put out the products. We should never forget that while our the men of some women of our greatest generation went to war and defeated, the fascism, the Nazis in Europe, but the fascists around the world in the battlefield, we should never forget that it was the Rosie the Riveter, and the men and women who Rosie the Riveter represented, who really worked and poured out machinery and equipment at a rate that was unheard of. It is that common person who drove the master race into the dirt. We should never forget that. It is the common man. That is what the last century, and I hope the next millennium, is about. The common man. And that is what democracy in the republic is about. The common person who can rise and do great things. Not about some predetermined title or hierarchy. So I'd like to move on to the conclusion here in segment 4. There are several more topics, and I could go on a long time about themes within the book and the Demonstrative Citizen. But I think that, we'll cover things and talk about AI. I think it's a huge thing. I know some people who are working on AI right now, and I think there's some interesting things to talk about that and how it affects our society and the politics of it, and maybe some of the good, the bad, and the ugly of it, the economics of it. There's also, financial issues. I don't like to talk about the billionaires out there because, frankly, it's hard to say that some billionaire investor just threw $15 billion or $15 million into a stock. It's kind of like, for a lot of people in the world, they're trying to pay their bills, right? We're trying to pay our bills. We have enough money to take the family out to eat after it's all said and done, right? What are you talking about? But we can talk about those economics and how those plans and some of the things, some of the strategies that are not talking head conversation, but just fundamentals, and maybe sitting down with, and encourage you to sit down with someone who is a professional. My background's accounting, by the way. I have a bachelor's and master's in accounting. I did that for a long time before I started getting into this. And no, I'm not here to give you financial advice, but I'm here to give you a mindset. And I hope others who will come on this podcast will help you get a mindset on that works for the average person. Something that you can do. And that dovetails into things like emergency preparedness and other things that we're working on so that you can have, some peace of mind, a little security, and maybe something in close by that if really you need to, you have something to fall back on, because these are important topics to work towards in our lives. Another topic that is in the book that I'd really like to touch on is the militia. Now, I know that makes just people bristle when you talk about the militia, because that's just a topic that has been so downtrodden in our society. And it takes place in the book. We shouldn't forget that the militia is kind of a concept. What the book talks about is very similar to what happened in Ukraine. People just got together and fought back. They went down and the government gave them an AK, right? And they went out, and by God, they pushed them back. They pushed the Russians back. Now, some of that was the Russians' fault, but they really did fight back. And these things have happened in our world, and they continue to happen. Our own liberty was started by that concept. We should not knock the militia and we should try to understand what militia really means. Not a group of guys running through the woods in boonie hats. We can be a part military, I guess, idea. I don't want to use military because it's not the right term. But we can have that security aspect. But the militia, very frankly, is enshrined in the U.S. Code. It is, I believe it's Section 10. It's titled the militia. The code breaks it down into two sections. It talks about the militia as the regular military and National Guard and things like that, the cloth military, but the professional military. But it also talks about a second part of that, which is really the body of the American people. And yes, that body acts as a pool for the regular military to draw on for its forces. But that body also constitutes something very special, and we've seen it rise throughout our history as a force of good. These are the people who made up the WASPs and other volunteer groups in World War II. They began building the Grand Army of the North in the Civil War. People volunteered and they went out, and some of them were militia units that later became incorporated into the Army and were trained. Others just provided. We can go to work. Rosie the Riveter. This is part of the great American militia. It is design of who we are. These people who do the impossible things, they go out and they work for the betterment of our society. They learn to care for each other. That is what in the book I refer to as the great American militia. It is that body of the American people that is able to rise to the challenges that face our nation when we are not prepared or when we are in need in specific areas. And that's something that we should explore and talk about it in a real positive point of view. There have been times our country has been attacked. Not that I'm predicting that necessarily, but we are in a fairly volatile world right now. And the simple reality is the body of the American people, an armed body of the American people, a well-trained armed body of the American people, is what our enemies fear the most. Yes, we have a great military, powerful military, wonderful young men and women who we could not be more proud of. They are our sons and daughters, our fathers, our uncles, our aunts. They are us. But we have a responsibility to clothe them, to feed them, to prepare them, to give them the equipment they need. And we stand ready behind them. When after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, they moved into American territories and protectorates throughout the Asian Pacific Rim, and were expanding very quickly. If that sounds familiar, we're starting to see a new version of that in the Asian Rim area with China, and there are threats of it. But there were other areas of the United States, the Aleutian Islands and the Alaskan island chain. Certain islands were invaded by the Japanese, and there were plans to invade the west coast of the United States, or at least part of it, in an attempt to force surrender. One of the reasons they didn't, and I'm sure it's not the only reason, but there were other reasons. One of the reasons they didn't is the general staff of the Japanese army at the time basically said there would be a gun behind every bush. They really were afraid of the fact that they would have to fight an asymmetric warfare with a population that was looking to repel them, and they would just be depleted. It would be too expensive, too costly in blood and treasure to ever do. That is a powerful thing. And do not underestimate our enemies, foreign and domestic. Know it. And they fear you. And you should never, ever surrender that. But you must also carry it with the morality and the responsibility that is given to you as a citizen of this country. And this podcast, Citizen Bear, wants to talk about those things. It wants to talk to them in a down-to-earth way, in a responsible way, and talk about who we are and who we want to continue to be. So we also want to go on a little bit beyond that. There's a wide range of discussions that we can talk about, and I'm sure there'll be some creative thought, and I'm sure people will give me ideas down the road, so we may get into things that are not exactly on topic with the book, and if they're fun and we can do them and have a few laughs, why not, right? So we can get into other things, and they may at least touch on the peripheral of what the themes of the book. I look forward to this podcast. I'm excited about it, and I want to get down the road. And I'm new to it. This is not what I do. This is something that's new for me, but it is a new beginning, and it's a new way forward, as my friend Bear found out. And I want to follow in that. I want to walk that journey too. And this is a great way to start reaching out and taking hold of some of these topics and taking them to a larger audience and starting to say that we can do things better and we can reinvest in who we are, and we don't have to accept what is being dealt to us. We choose. We make the choices. We decide. And when we do, we will be grand and we will be unstoppable. But we have to be united, and we must care for each other. Being divided, being tribal, these are the things that destroy us. These are the things that our enemies count on to pull us apart. And we should never let that happen. America's strength has always been in its unity and its grace towards others. It's far from perfect, I have to admit. There are things that we can talk about in that. But we can strive to be better. And I can talk about my own life and some of those things. I go back to another time. And there's a generational aspect to this where I think I can talk to young people and say, look, we didn't drop the ball on this. We just thought we were moving forward, and maybe we were wrong, and maybe we missed some points, but some of what's being done here isn't right either. We just don't agree. And maybe you ought to think about it because, from a generational standpoint, I have to be honest, I'm going to be 61 in a few weeks. I've raised my family. My son has grown. He's a good man. He's a lawyer. I'm very proud of him. But he's starting his own family, and he tends to be a little more liberal-oriented than I am, and I'm proud of him. And, he's walking a journey himself, and maybe he'll be a little more centered, but that's okay. He and his friends are, finding their way, and I appreciate his perspective on some things. But on the other side of the coin, I think in a conversation with him one time, he was shocked to understand something when I was arguing with him about some topics. I wasn't arguing for me. My family's grown. It's not going to affect me, There's never going to be a guy in my daughter's bathroom, There's never going to be. They're never going to change my son's sex in high school, right? None of this is ever going to happen for me. I'm done. But it is going to happen for some of the young people starting out right now. So be careful what you argue for, because you might end up getting it. And when you become a father, and when you become a mother, and when you become a parent and you bond with your children, you may find that your politics don't always work for how you want to raise your family. And that's a very powerful part of this conversation that you have to understand, and that some of us have lived. So I can't make you think a certain way, but I'd like to open your eyes from a different perspective. I'm not arguing, and people like me are not arguing, my age, are not arguing this because it affects us. It's not going to affect me at all. But it might affect you. And we want you to have the tools as parents, as adults, as past masters, if you will, of our society. We want you to take a look at those things and think about it a little more carefully. And we've seen some great people rise up and do this in younger generations, and I'm very proud of them for bringing up the argument in the face of even some ridicule. They have stood by Title IX and other things, and they want to get back to basics in Title IX. And I think that's important for young women, but that's a conversation that needs to be had, and it's a hot topic right now, and we should continue to press it. We should continue to have that, but in a calm and decent manner where we can address a lot of the topics in those things. I think more than anything, we have to take a look at who we are and move forward. And this podcast, I hope, will cover all those bases. So as I wind down here in this introduction to the podcast, I want you all to take some time and get involved and hopefully tune in for us. And I want to start this journey. I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to working with the team we have here, and I'm doing the work that we're going to do and having some great conversations. And hopefully we make an impact, and hopefully we can open some people's minds, and hopefully we can think about changing the world a little bit in a good way, change it for the better. So let us begin.